If I had to write a job description for a member of Congress, I'd say there's probably three things. One is you have to go up to Washington and pass legislation. You have to read the bills and debate the bills, follow the committee hearings. The other part is coming back home and speaking to school groups, touring plants, speaking to Rotary clubs, meeting with individual groups and constituents. And then the third part is the politics of it. You got to be able to campaign. You can't take the politics out of the politics. And each one of those three major categories has all kinds of components. In Washington, you do have to be somebody who reads, writes, and can formulate ideas. The time that you have as an individual member to debate some very profound piece of legislation might be limited to 1 or 2 minutes. Now, you can kind of increase that by speaking over a couple of days period of time, but the actual debate on bills is usually limited to maybe 2 to 3 hours. So an individual member of Congress may only have 1 minute. And if you can imagine, you've got to wrap up your support or your opposition within 60 seconds to a huge piece of legislation. It's very difficult. You got to be able to turn ideas, and if somebody challenges you in a committee, you've got to be able to answer that question really quickly. And you have to do this in the context that you have constituents constantly meeting you and people who want to talk to you. So it's not like you have hours and hours alone in your congressional office to decide on how you're going to vote or to review things. And because of that, you're working long and odd hours trying to get things done. I think probably the worst person to sit next to on an airplane is a member of Congress, because he or she's probably reading legislation or sleeping. It might be their first chance that they get. The second part of it, going back home, the first district of Georgia during my 22 years was actually reapportioned 5 different times. And so I've represented 41 different South Georgia counties. And these counties I always think of they're like sisters. If you go to Evans County, that doesn't count for anything in Bullock County or Tattnall County. You got to go to all 3 of them. They might be related and totally different from North Georgia counties, but the reality is if you go to one, it doesn't count in the others. So you got to visit each one of them and go talk to different people. And what we always tried to do is make sure that we did public things. People knew I was in town. They were accessible. We would call the elected officials and let them know, and anybody who may have wanted to meet with me, we'd host meetings and so forth, and we'd always try our best to keep good media relations. And we found that in our part of the state we have great media. We have media that's fair and balanced, and so all the good stuff, they'd criticize me, but they would also give me good press as well. And then the campaigning part, you're on a 2-year cycle, and congressional races now are anywhere from $500,000 to millions and millions of dollars, depending on what kind of media market you're in, depending on what your demographics are, how competitive the district is itself. So you do have to have one eye on fundraising so that you can get your message out. You got to have one eye on grassroots politics so that you can keep members of the Democrat or Republican base happy. Try to keep away a primary opponent, and then keep your side energized so that if you have a general opponent, they're willing to stuff envelopes, make phone calls, and put up yard signs for you. And you can't do any of that on tax dime. So everything that you do is political. It's got to be outside of the office. My predecessor, Lindsey Thomas, told me that we would spend $75,000 in the off season when there was no election. And I thought, and that's $75,000 in campaign dollars. And I thought, well, Lindsey was probably doing something wrong. Well, little did I know, we probably ended up spending about $100,000 in the off season. And this is even, if you have a weak opponent or not. But, groups come up to you. They want you to donate to their cause. So you find yourself writing some checks to charity. You need to have FEC reports. You got to keep your compliance level high. We probably spent, I'm guessing we had great accountants. Hancock Askew did a superb job, but you needed to pay them, and you needed to look at your books on a regular basis. And then you had to rent office space because you can't have any overlap with your government office. And so we had a different office in a different location, and we had a staffer who would come there on a regular basis and be paid on an hourly. And so I just say that that was part of what we did. And if anything was ever in the gray area, campaign ended up paying for it, not the taxpayers. But so the job description, I made the promise to my successor, Buddy Carter, I would not give him any unsolicited advice. But I can say if he's like me, I asked Lindsey Thomas, my predecessor, even though we weren't in the same parties, we had a lot in common and particularly a lot of common philosophy. But I asked him lots of questions. And his predecessor, Bo Ginn, I still would call Bo Ginn on occasions as well. Both of them were extremely helpful to me, and I hope that we'll be there for Buddy Carter should he have any questions.